The word of the day is patriarchy. The phrase of the day is toxic masculinity. What brings this all up? Well, compliments of Gillette putting out a ad bashing men, claiming toxic masculinity, which if you really look behind the ad, it's basically convincing men to shave. It's a shaving company. It sells razors. They want men to shave because it's coming to a point where the feminists are going to look at the last vestige of masculinity, which is the ability of men to have hair on their face, as something to trigger them. It's going to be used as a symbol of toxic masculinity. If you've seen the ad, you need to see it. There's a bunch of men standing behind grilling, and they got beards. And in case you didn't know, grilling and eating meat is now a symbol of patriarchy as well. So let's, it really comes down to this. Let's attack everything that's male, and let's feminize the young men, educate them to be feminine, and make them all into beta males, omega males, for crying out loud at this point. And this is what the modern feminists want. They want a society that lacks masculinity because they blame all the ills on culture and society on patriarchy, on maleness, on being maleness. And the truth is that the hierarchical structure of human beings is innate, whether they like it or not. And it goes back to being hunters and gatherers, and some pockets of humanity are still hunters and gatherers, where the men are primarily the hunters and the defenders, more or less. And that, regardless of the age that we live in, regardless of time, that has traditionally always been, that's what they consider the patriarchy, based on the social construct of gender roles, instead of the hierarchical structure of human beings as a species. Hierarchy is common throughout the natural world. It's not a social construct, okay? Some species of animals are matriarchal, like in horses. Elephants are matriarchal. Even the great whales, the big ones, the cetaceans, their hierarchy is matriarchal. You can't change that. Now, you can sit there and try to change human society and with your crazy liberal agenda, but you're not going to change biologically how we are, regardless of all the Frankenstein science that's involved. So, the elimination of maleness, and this is what the feminists want, because they believe men are inherently wicked and evil because men tend to be more aggressive. Well, aggression channeled does incredible things, and that's what men typically try to do with their aggression. It tries to be channeled into positive things. It needs to be channeled into positive things. How I define masculinity is very different. I view being masculine as something what's called being humble, and not the English definition of being humble. The Greek definition of being humble is used to describe a war horse from ancient warfare, when horses were used as tanks. And it means a great strength under control, or harnessed, more or less. And in the ancient world, a horse functioned as a tank. It was a weapon used offensively and defensively. And horses by nature are not an animal that wants to deal with conflict. They want to flee from it. They want to run from it. Only do they, unless they have no choice and they're cornered, they're out of, but it's based out of fear. Horses are fearful animals. So to use them on a human battlefield at a time where there were shields and swords and bows and arrows and the smell of death and blood were in the air, the horse had to be controlled. It had to be trained to use its strength under control, and then you could use it as a defensive or an offensive weapon. That is what masculinity is about. It's about control. It's about taking responsibility for your actions as a man, because as a man, your as a human being, but particularly with men, our actions, what we do, has profound repercussions throughout society. Our society has turned into a shit fest because we have, since the 60s, women have allowed men to get away with bullshit in the idea of sexual freedom. Based on the pill and some other things that came along. And all of a sudden now women could behave more like men sexually. Look, I'm not making an excuse for men being idiots throughout history, because that hasn't changed in some aspects. Boys will be boys. But what happens is real men man up. They man up. They take responsibility for their actions, and society becomes a better place for it. Women like alpha males. You'll find women married to beta males, and they end up, because they like to walk over them, but they end up sleeping with alpha males on the side. I've seen it my whole life. They end up going to the bad boys. And why? Because the bad boys are the only one with any testosterone left. And that's toxic masculinity. But you have women who flock. I've seen society filled with women who involve themselves with horrible men, because those men have attributes of being an alpha male. Normal women don't want to hook themselves up with beta males. I've seen women bash husbands before, and it's always because they were beta males. And then they end up gravitating. They end up wanting to cheat with alphas. And everybody's seen it. And you've often wondered why that is. Well, that's why. So this whole concept of toxic masculinity, look, I'm not talking about men to be rude and to be bullies or to be just plain assholes. Women can be assholes too. They just do it a whole different way. There's a different way. Women act out being assholes completely different than men do. So this whole idea of the patriarchy and the hierarchical structure, it's a social construct. It's all bullshit. Won't you believe it for 5 minutes? It's a bunch of liberal psychologists, a bunch of liberal professors pushing weird, strange, Marxist, pseudoscience ideas on people for the last 30 to 40 years. And it's coming to fruition because you're putting out young men and young women that are completely brainwashed with bogus science, bullshit socialism based on some Marxist bullshit. And I'm the last vestige. This is my generation, the last vestige of sanity, because what is coming down the pike is terrible. Liberal women they're nasty. I like strong conservative women because they tend to argue. They tend to present logical and reasonable arguments for being who they are, because they think. Liberal women argue out of emotions. Women argue out of emotions, period. When women are able to harness that into something else, it's a whole different thing. Now, some people think I'm anti-woman. I am not, but I like strong women. I do not like women, and my definition of strong women is different than what a feminist would think a strong woman is. Human beings had to work together. Men and women had to work together to survive life. Whether it is at a hunter-gatherer level or an industrialized level or a technological level. Because life is difficult. If you're trying to run a home with several kids and you're trying to do it by yourself, ask any single mother. You think single mothers want to have weak men involved in their lives? They don't want weak men. They don't want that. It takes a strong man to take responsibility for their actions. And that's what men used to do. Men were taught that by their fathers. Man up, shut up, do what you got to do. And that's why men used to marry the women they got pregnant back in the past. And then they took responsibility for it. And they learned how to work through life together to raise the kids up. Now, man, I could give you some examples from my own family with the women. They love The women in my family, and they learned it from their mothers, they like the beta males. And the beta males turn out always the same. They shirk their responsibility. They run from the responsibilities that they have contributed to. And they're just pieces of shit. Is that toxic masculinity? No, they're just pieces of shit men, period. That's it. They're just pieces of shit as men. And they weren't taught, and their fathers tend to be pieces of shit as men. I was raised by a very passive male. I would probably call him a beta male now. I didn't realize till after he died that all the women in the family controlled him. His mother, his sisters, his nieces. You know, he taught me maleness. He taught me how to throw a ball. He taught me how to use hand tools. He taught me how to use power tools. He was in World War II. He held dying men in his arms. And I never saw this man cry. He expressed his emotions differently. He could tell somebody he loved them. But I never remember him having an instance where he felt he had to cry. You know, even when his sister passed away, and he's in his 90s, he realized, he was sad, but he realized that her time has come. She's been around for 90 years, and he realizes he's next in line. You don't think he's sad about that? Oh, toxic masculinity, didn't cry. When men cry, we have the same emotions as anybody else. We have human emotions. We express them differently. We don't cry when we get a flat tire. Some men do now. You know, we typically get pissed off or angry. We don't cry over this. There's stuff that's worth crying over. There's stuff that isn't. You put a dog down, you cry when you put your dog down. You cry when something happens in your family. But you don't cry because some other man hurt your feelings. And that's the one thing about us men. We can give each other a lot of shit, give each other a hard time, but we deal with each other as men. We deal with women differently. We deal with children differently. You do not want men to deal with your children like you do. Feminists may think that, but that's bullshit. Because kids need to see a proper gender role. They need to see how men are, how men deal with, particularly boys. Because there comes a time when boys start looking to men to learn how to be them. And they end up imitating what they're exposed to. You single mothers, you ever wonder why there's so many kids running the streets in certain minority groups that I'm not allowed to say anymore because, you know, it's not socially acceptable and it's not politically correct. When you know why they're running the streets and they connect themselves up to gangs, because it's the only male form of alpha. It's the only form of alpha maleism that they see, because they sure to hell ain't got it at home because of their fathers. But in the past, it wasn't like that. When the father was there, he beat his son's ass when he got out of line. You know, somewhere along the line, a father pulls his son off to the side and says, hey, you're going to treat young ladies with respect. I was 5 years old when I got that lecture, and I'll never forget it. But every man gets that when they have a father that's worth any salt. No man is perfect. No woman is perfect. But to jump on this bandwagon, because this is what it is. And they use the whole thought that it's the education that's going to change. It's the educational system. You need to look. You're getting to a point where they're going to start. They're already drugging little boys to behave in school. You're already drugging them instead of realizing that they learn differently and they develop differently than females, and they want compliance in a school. So they're already drugging them. You don't think there's a time coming where they're not going to start giving them doses of estrogen to monitor, to control their behavior? So this beard is a symbol of the patriarchy. This beard is a symbol of toxic masculinity. And unless you don't harness proper maleness, you are going to have women that are going to gravitate to the negative elements in males in the male society, the male culture, as you may want to call it. But they're going to start branding everything that men are toxic masculinity. And it's really upsetting. And it is beyond ridiculous. And every time you hear a woman start spitting that word out, patriarchy, realize that they are hooked up with a beta male. And these are the kind of guys, that's exactly what it is. They are beta males. I don't know what the hell our society is coming down to, but liberalism is a cancer. And it is going to be, and like cancer, it spreads, and if left uncontrolled, it eventually spreads to everything, killing it. And that's what's going to happen in our society and our culture. So remember that you raise up your boys. Remember, there's coming a time where they're going to start to give them birth control pills. Keep that in the back of your mind.